10 war films lost millions at the box office but earned something Hollywood couldn't buy, and that was the respect of actual combat veterans. General audiences stayed away while military communities embraced these movies for their unflinching authenticity. From the jungles of Vietnam to the mountains of Afghanistan, these commercial failures became sacred texts among those who served. And what the studios saw as disasters, soldiers saw as the rare films that got it right. December 1968 brought Hell in the Pacific to theaters with a premise unlike anything audiences had encountered before. Only 2 actors appeared in the entire film, Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune, playing enemy soldiers stranded together on a deserted Pacific island during World War II. John Borman directed the production in the Palau Islands, nearly 1,000 miles east of the Philippines, where cast and crew lived aboard a ship and traveled to filming locations via tank landing craft. By all accounts, the experience turned nightmarish, with cultural clashes between American and Japanese crews compounding the difficulties of remote island shooting. Somewhere between $4 and $7 million went into the budget, depending on which source you trust. But the box office returns painted a grim picture. Just over $3 million came back worldwide, and by 1973, the recorded loss exceeded $4 million, making it one of the biggest money losers in ABC Films' short history. Critics at the time pointed to perceived similarities with Frank Sinatra's None But the Brave from 1965 and the experimental storytelling approach featuring minimal dialogue with no subtitles for Japanese-struck reviewers as out of step with late 60s commercial filmmaking. None of that mattered to military audiences, and here's why. Both lead actors had actually served as combat veterans in World War II on opposing sides. Lee Marvin earned a Purple Heart as a United States Marine Corps scout sniper after taking a hit during the Battle of Saipan in 1944 that severed his sciatic nerve. Toshiro Mifune served in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service, bringing authentic understanding of Japanese military bearing to his performance. That real combat experience gave their work genuine weight that audiences could feel. Critics now praise the film for showing the importance of human contact and the bond that can form between enemies, and Marvin himself put it simply when he stated the film was about 2 men who simply cannot end each other's lives. Rotten Tomatoes currently shows a 67% rating, with IMDb sitting at 7.2. Sam Peckinpah made only 1 war film in his entire career, and Cross of Iron from 1977 remained his personal favorite among everything he directed. James Coburn, Maximilian Schell, James Mason, and David Warner starred in this Anglo-German co-production about Wehrmacht soldiers fighting on the brutal Eastern Front. Trouble plagued the production from day one. Cost overruns hit approximately £2 million, pushing the total budget to an estimated $6 to $8 million, and Peckinpah reached into his own pocket to pay crew members just to keep cameras rolling. Yugoslavia provided authentic Eastern European locations, and the Yugoslav People's Army supplied real Soviet T-34/85 tanks for the battle sequences. American audiences stayed away in droves. Star Wars dominated theaters that same year, and the subject matter presenting German soldiers sympathetically proved too controversial for stateside viewers. West Germany told a different story entirely, where the film became the highest-grossing movie since The Sound of Music. Military communities responded in ways the American box office never reflected. One soldier's IMDb review explained that his platoon leader selected Cross of Iron as training material for the entire company to demonstrate leadership qualities in non-commissioned officers and the cohesion of small units. Readers of Military.com suggested Cross of Iron as a must-watch multiple times in their surveys. Orson Welles sent Peckinpah a cable calling it the best war film about the ordinary enlisted man since All Quiet on the Western Front. And that praise carried weight. Authenticity ran through every frame because the source novel came from Willy Heinrich, a German World War II veteran wounded 5 times on the Eastern Front. Johann Schwerdtfeger, a highly decorated Wehrmacht NCO who fought through the Battle of the Caucasus and Kuban Pocket, inspired the character of Steiner. Schwerdtfeger lived until 2015, reaching 101 years old. Quentin Tarantino drew on the film for Inglourious Basterds, and it currently holds 71% on Rotten Tomatoes with a 7.4 on IMDb. The Deer Hunter and Coming Home both won Academy Awards in 1978, and both completely overshadowed Go Tell the Spartans, a modest Burt Lancaster production that depicted the early Vietnam advisory period in 1964 before major American escalation. Shoestring doesn't begin to describe the budget situation. When funding dried up, Lancaster personally invested approximately $150,000 from his own pocket to keep cameras rolling. Yet, despite his star power, the film received extremely limited theatrical distribution and essentially vanished. Stanley Kaufman of the New Republic called it the best film about Vietnam he'd seen to date outside of documentaries. IMDb reviewers have argued that while Platoon raises the same issues about the futility of that conflict, Go Tell the Spartans handles them better. An actual 1964 Special Forces operation at Tan Hoa in the Central Highlands inspired the story. Lancaster plays a career soldier who served in World War II and Korea, the kind of professional military man who understood what Vietnam would become before the politicians figured it out. The title references the ancient epitaph at Thermopylae, drawing a thematic line to soldiers following orders into doomed situations, and veterans appreciated the authentic depiction of advisory mission challenges, along with the portrayal of how hard-fought the conflict was from the very beginning. Rotten Tomatoes describes it as a cult film that has been re-released over the years, currently holding a 67% critic score and 6.6 on IMDb. Decades of personal history arrived on screen with The Big Red One in 1980. Director Samuel Fuller had served in the actual 1st Infantry Division during World War II, earning a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. Omaha Beach on D-Day, the liberation of Falkenau concentration camp, Fuller lived through all of it, and this film was his story. $4 to $4.5 million covered the production budget. Lee Marvin headlined alongside a young Mark Hamill fresh off Star Wars, following the division from North Africa through Sicily, Normandy, Belgium, and into Czechoslovakia, and that's when the studio stepped in. United Artists took Fuller's 4-hour director's cut and slashed it to 113 minutes without asking for his input. The theatrical version came in 98th place at the American box office that year, crushed by summer releases like Airplane and The Blue Lagoon. But Fuller had created something veterans recognized as true. Roger Ebert quoted him in a Great Movies review saying he wanted to tell the story of a survivor, because all war stories are told by survivors. One Amazon reviewer pointed out that Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan depicts D-Day with realism lauded by veterans, but The Big Red One depicts it too. And a veteran made that one. Robert Carradine played Zab, a character essentially representing Fuller himself. Lee Marvin brought his own combat experience to the role as well, having served as a Marine and earned a Purple Heart at Saipan. 47 minutes of footage came back in 2004 when critic Richard Schickel supervised a reconstruction that elevated the film's reputation dramatically. That version earned 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and 77% on Metacritic, with Collider calling it one of the best war movies of the 1980s, an epic B-movie so great that it's easy to mistake it for an A-class production. Walter Hill followed the Warriors with Southern Comfort in September 1981, tracking Louisiana Army National Guard soldiers on a weekend training exercise that goes catastrophically wrong in the bayou. $7 to $8 million went into the budget. Just under $3 million came back. Hill put it bluntly when discussing the results, saying it didn't make a nickel anywhere, foreign, domestic, anything, calling it a universal audience failure. What he confirmed later was what many viewers suspected all along. The film functioned as a Vietnam allegory, and Hill acknowledged they were very aware people would see it as a metaphor for that conflict. Keith Carradine, Powers Booth, Fred Ward, and Peter Coyote portrayed soldiers whose unit cohesion disintegrates when leadership fails. The transformation from commercial disaster to cult classic happened over decades. Retrospective praise centered on its status as an underrated entry in Hill's filmography, and Collider named it his third best movie in 2020, describing it as one of his most thematically complicated and technically accomplished thrillers. Academic studies have examined the film's exploration of fracturing masculinities haunted by Vietnam-era failures. Influence extended beyond the cult audience when David Giler reportedly used Southern Comfort to convince a studio to greenlight Aliens, describing that project as Southern Comfort in space. The 2024 Vinegar Syndrome 4K release sparked renewed critical attention, and IMDb currently shows a 7.1 rating, $8 million. That's what went into The Beast of War, also released simply as The Beast, when it came out in September 1988. Director Kevin Reynolds told the story of a Soviet tank crew lost in Afghanistan during the 1981 invasion. The theatrical gross landed at $161,000, a loss of approximately 98%. Quality wasn't the problem. A studio head changed during production, and the new executive provided zero promotional support, opening the film on just 2 screens with no marketing push whatsoever. What nobody expected was HBO picking it up and airing it repeatedly. The film has enjoyed cult favorite status despite catastrophic box office statistics. Collider calls it a modest cult classic among war film aficionados whose following remains passionate enough to make it an enduring triumph. TV Tropes describes it as vindicated by cable, becoming known through HBO airings and the rental market. Military authenticity proved exceptional throughout. Captain Dale Dye served as military advisor and personally negotiated the purchase of actual T-55 tanks from the Israel Defense Forces over drinks with IDF officers in a Tel Aviv hotel. Authentic Pashto dialogue spoken by Afghan characters and exploration of Nanawatai, the Pashtun code of hospitality, added layers of realism. Veterans praised the sympathetic, non-propagandistic portrayal of the Soviet tank crew, which was remarkable for a Cold War-era production. The film depicts crew dynamics under combat stress without reducing anyone to propaganda villains. IMDb shows a 7.3 rating, and Rotten Tomatoes has an 84% audience score. Something genuinely revolutionary emerged in 1989 with 84 Charlie MoPic, one of the earliest found footage films, predating the Blair Witch Project by a full decade. The title refers to Army MOS 84C20, the designation for a motion picture cameraman, and the entire film unfolds from the perspective of a cameraman documenting a long-range reconnaissance patrol in Vietnam. Patrick Sheen Duncan directed after serving with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam, drawing on personal combat experience to create what many consider the most authentic Vietnam film ever made. The production budget stayed extremely low, filmed in Southern California, with unknown actors and minimal distribution. Veteran response has been extraordinary ever since. Combat veteran Mike Durand, writing for military publication Breach Bang Clear, stated, "This is as accurate a picture of an American combat soldier's experience in Vietnam as any he could imagine," adding that having been a soldier in combat, it rings absolutely true, and when he first saw it, he wasn't 100% certain it was fiction. A former Marine wrote on IMDb that when someone asks which Vietnam films are best, 84 Charlie MoPic and The Odd Angry Shot sit at the top of a very short list. Roger Ebert declared he had never seen a combat movie that seemed this close to actual experience. Film historian Paul Holsinger noted that pretty much everything about the film is accurate, from the language soldiers use to the weaponry and details of radio communication. The Nevada Department of Veteran Services hosted a special VIP screening with cast and crew to honor Vietnam veterans, and Vietnam Veterans of America features the film in their resources. Best First Feature and Best Screenplay at the 1990 Independent Spirit Awards went to this production. Rotten Tomatoes shows a perfect 100% critics score. $30 to $35 million went into Flight of the Intruder, which opened in January 1991 with the misfortune of releasing during the start of Operation Desert Storm. Just over $14 million came back domestically, translating to losses somewhere between $15 and $20 million. John Milius never directed another theatrical release. Stephen Kuntz wrote the source novel as a Vietnam veteran Navy A-6 pilot who flew 2 combat cruises aboard USS Enterprise, made 305 carrier landings, and logged 1,600 hours in A-6 Intruders. Personal combat experience shaped every page. Complete U.S. Navy cooperation backed the production. 8 naval air facilities provided support. The USS Independence served as a filming location for 2 weeks, and actual A-6E intruders from the VA-165 Boomer Squadron appear on screen. Danny Glover spent 5 days aboard USS Independence researching his role. Critics panned the editing and special effects, leaving Rotten Tomatoes at 34%, but veteran audiences saw something different entirely. One Rotten Tomatoes reviewer mentioned listening to a podcast interview with a Vietnam veteran, a 6 bombardier, who stated the movie was a mostly accurate depiction of combat in the A-6. An IMDb reviewer wrote that this was a favorite growing up and probably the entire reason they joined the Navy, arguing it has more realism than Top Gun. Another veteran reviewer noted it's about the only film that gives decent treatment to carrier pilots. The National Naval Aviation Museum features the film's history in their A-6 Intruder exhibit, and the Aviation Geek Club wrote that the toughness of the planes and their pilots made them legendary and inspired both the book and film. $148,000. That's the worldwide theatrical gross for Tigerland, released in October 2000 with a $10 million budget, translating to losses exceeding 99%. Joel Schumacher directed with Colin Farrell in his first lead role. The real advanced infantry training facility at Fort Polk, Louisiana, that prepared soldiers for Vietnam provided the setting. Handheld 16mm cameras created a deliberately documentary approach that avoided glamour in every possible way. One IMDb reviewer identified himself as a Vietnam veteran who actually trained at Fort Polk in 1971, writing that it was certainly interesting to review a film that took place where he resided for 2 months, and that he saw so many kids just like the ones portrayed on screen. Roger Ebert included Tigerland in his valued category for top films of 2000. Veterans appreciate the realistic depiction of barracks lawyer culture and accurate portrayal of soldiers using loopholes to avoid deployment. Pre-combat psychology takes center stage rather than actual combat, focusing on the dread of what's coming rather than the experience itself. Schumacher considered it his best reviewed film, and the production launched Colin Farrell's entire career. Rotten Tomatoes shows 77%, with IMDb at 6.9. Perhaps the strongest documented veteran endorsement of any film on this list belongs to The Outpost, which arrived in July 2020. Director Rod Lurie brought his West Point education and Army veteran status to the story of the Battle of Kamdesh, one of the most intense engagements of the Afghanistan conflict. Approximately $18 million covered the production budget. Around $2.3 million came back theatrically. The COVID-19 pandemic limited release to just 69 theaters when wide distribution was planned, forcing a shift to premium video on demand. What makes this film unique is the unprecedented involvement of actual participants. Staff Sergeant Ty Carter, a Medal of Honor recipient from the battle, served as military advisor and co-producer. First Lieutenant Henry Hughes plays Sergeant Brad Larson. Specialist Daniel Rodriguez plays himself. The rough cut screened for surviving soldiers and Gold Star families before release, with grief therapists present. Dr. Dan Barkhoff, a Navy SEAL and Naval Academy graduate, called it the best war movie since Black Hawk Down, maybe better. A 24-year Green Beret veteran stated the authenticity was amazing and had him reliving the sights and smells of Nuristan province. Retired Marine Colonel Eric Terashima rated it 9 out of 10 for realism. Medal of Honor recipient Ty Carter described watching the filming as a form of therapy, explaining that watching somebody else do it over and over again removed the anxiety. Stoney Portis, the actual unit commander depicted in the film, wrote in the New York Times that viewing it is part of the healing. Director Lurie said he wished upon every director a movie so suited to their emotional needs, calling it an honor and a duty to tell the story of his brothers in arms. Rotten Tomatoes shows 91% from critics and 94% from audiences. Something Hollywood accountants couldn't measure connects these 10 films. Each one prioritized authenticity over box office appeal. Actual combat veterans made many of them, including Samuel Fuller with his Silver Star, Patrick Sheen Duncan with his 173rd Airborne Service, and Rod Lurie with his West Point Commission. Others employed military advisors like Dale Dye, who refused to allow veterans' stories to be shabbily told. Studios saw red ink while veterans saw themselves. Bad timing, studio interference, controversial subject matter, and limited distribution caused these films to fail commercially. Success came where it mattered most. When a soldier watches 84 Charlie MoPic and isn't certain whether it's fiction, when a platoon leader selects Cross of Iron to teach leadership, when Medal of Honor recipients describe a film as part of their healing, that represents a different kind of achievement. Opening weekends measure box office success, but veterans measure truth. By that standard, these 10 supposed failures rank among the most successful war films ever made.